Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I'm your host, Wendy Nystrom, with my co-host, Mr. Joel Vendette. So welcome to the show. Today's special guest is Mr. Amit Bando. He is with Ceres. That is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Boston that helps corporations identify their sustainability initiatives and get there. So welcome to the show, Amit. Can you hear us, Amit? I'm not sure Amit can hear us. Joel, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. We seem to have...
Yes, I can hear you. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Is there a delay?
Glad to join you.
We have a major delay
Glad
in
to
our...
join you.
Yeah, we have a big delay.
This will be fun.
Yes, this will be fun. I'm hoping that maybe we can correct the delay, but we're going to go with it. We're going to work with it. Today's discussion is basically a just and inclusive economy. And I had asked Amit if he could explain what that means. Eventually. We're going to get there.
It's live.
Yeah. It's live. I'm going to bring you in because you seem to... Barbara, you still there?
I am. I'm trying to message Amit.
Yeah. Oh, he has a second stream because you seem to... Barbara, you still there?
Yes.
Okay, we'll try this one. How's this, Amit? No? Can you hear us now, Amit? Are we still
Can you all
delayed?
hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes. I don't know what happened.
Yes. Barbara, I'm going to just keep you on as our communications expert, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right. So, Amit, I introduced you with being in Ceres and how we're talking about a just and inclusive economy. And if you could explain real quick what that means.
Yes, and thanks again. So as we look at issues related to just and inclusive economics, which is JIE for short, this term is sort of a broad term that looks at the fact that once we look at policies or actions related to moving from where we are, that is a fossil fuel-based economy, to one that is not dependent on fossil fuels. Of course, this is sort of two extreme ends of the spectrum. Along the way, you will have different degrees of decarbonization. And so it's a journey. And along that journey, there are going to be many changes. We're going to be moving from established ways of doing business, established sites where facilities are located, to perhaps new sites, new ways of operation, and moving into new sectors with new technologies, new training needs, etc., which means that people and communities are going to be affected. And so the idea behind just and inclusive economics is to particularly be deliberate and ensure that the people and communities that are affected in a negative way are not left behind. Just to give you some examples, we are very interested in moving away from fossil fuel-based electric power generation.
Yes.
Now, for that to happen, we are probably going to move towards renewable energy, solar power, wind power, etc. But note what happens there is we are possibly talking about shutting down facilities that are paying well, unionized jobs with health benefits. People are able to raise their families, be in a location, and contribute to the community. Schools, churches, shopping, ancillary businesses. Now, we may end up disrupting that way of life to move towards contract labor, moving from one facility to another as you start installing wind turbines. That then has an implication on the lives of the people that are impacted. And the just and inclusive economics terms suggest that we need to be aware of what's going on, and we need to have a plan of action.
Yes.
That's really the crux of what we talk about. And as we move forward, I'll talk a little bit more later about the fact that historically there have been certain communities, certain people that have been left behind or disproportionately impacted. Just and Inclusive Economics says those historical trends need to be addressed in a meaningful way.
When you and I previously spoke, we talked about how there is a historical imbalance, specifically with whole communities. Could you go into a little detail about what that historical imbalance specifically was and how we're addressing it?
Yes, so there are many examples where you've had a situation where historically people living in communities that have been negatively impacted, disproportionately impacted. Often these are communities of color, so the BIPOC community, or people that are, Black, indigenous people of color. They are often the ones, and again, there's ample data to suggest that they are the ones that suffer the most. So you look at air pollution, whether it's carbon emissions or vehicular emissions, particularly things like sulfur dioxide and others. These have very localized impacts. So people that are living within 500 yards of a highway are going to suffer very disproportionately. And of course, these are, again, the people that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. People that are living in areas where there are oil refineries will suffer the most. And in fact, there are lots of examples, including what's termed Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where the incidence of cancer is way above average. And guess again, that's where the people that are the workers, the people that are living, have no choice in terms of moving out. So these are, again, people of color. So that's the disproportionate negative impact of the current system. And as we move away from the current system, not only do we have an opportunity to decarbonize, but we also have an opportunity to address some of these impacts that we see at a societal level.
Yeah.
So as we start looking at the past and neighborhoods and communities that were drastically and disproportionately affected by past policies, how do you get people to trust new policies going forward, that it will be better for them? I mean, that's a huge hurdle, I would imagine.
It is a huge hurdle. As you just said, it is, and I think you used the term exactly correctly. It's a matter of trust. Yeah. How do we trust the very same policies at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level? How do we trust the very same decision makers at companies that in the past have, let's just say, knowingly or unknowingly led to the current situation, right? So the very individuals that are impacted, the communities that are impacted and have found themselves to be always marginalized, it is very difficult to win back that trust. And I think that's really the key factor here. And also, I think to add to that point, it's not a matter of trusting on one action or at one point of time. It is something that has to be a long-term process. So to build up that long-term trust is a challenge. And I don't think there is a silver bullet in this discussion here. There are very many efforts at different levels, and I think there are some success stories and some that are not. So in a lot of ways, I think the trust is only one of the key things where I think I see the trust being built up, still understanding that it is a big, long process, very difficult. But one of the things that I think is necessary is that there has to be consistency in decision making. I think the trust often gets eroded very quickly when there's a flip-flop in decision making. Something that is promised today doesn't happen tomorrow for whatever reasons, but with lack of trust, that builds additional distrust. I think that's a starting point.
And I would think there's also a lack of a clear message, which is another hurdle. If you're looking at, trying to go from fossil fuel industries over to solar, it's about like trying to get people who base their entire families and generations on these prior industries to say, no, you will be trained to go forward. This will actually be better for you health-wise and your community. That's a really hard message when you've got so many outside influences coming in on that. So it's like you've got the trust issue, you've got the generations of these careers that have supported families and communities. But then you look at it's not just that. It's like, how are the roads treated? How is the education system treated? There's so much underlying there that to go forward with anything new is going to be really challenging to get, I would imagine, to get people on board.
You're right.
And may I suggest that there we have a challenge also, which I think is something that if we recognize that there are some legitimate concerns on the parts of the people that are impacted. Exactly. So the coal miner in West Virginia cannot be expected to sort of move in and agree to have their communities disrupted. Yes, it's good for the long run. It's good for the economy as a whole, but there is a definite impact that we need to be concerned about and be willing to address. If that slows things down a little bit, perhaps that's the way to go. Or if that puts in an element of we still have to deal with the coal miners, we still have to transition them out, and we have to do it in a way where it is not completely disruptive. But yes, it's going to probably slow down our move towards a national plan for decarbonization. That is a discussion that needs to be had. And I think this is often what we see when we talk about stakeholder involvement. Yeah. Communities and individuals that are stakeholders in this on both sides of the aisle, they need to be worried about, and be able to take in those concerns and try to address them.
Well, I think and I'm sorry, I'm totally spearheading this whole thing right now, Wendy, sorry. But I just want to really quick, I think you said something that's super important there, which is that it is a discussion where all parties have to come to the table and all parties have to listen to each other. And if it is a slow process, at least it's a process versus everybody retreating to their corners and looking at the other one and just saying, nope, you're wrong, I'm right. And that's unfortunately what's missing in a lot of our world.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to tie, and Joel, sorry, yes, your questions are wonderful and I love your questions. But going back a couple minutes, I wanted to tie in some loose ends for listeners that may not understand what, when we're talking about pollution, contamination, emissions, and frontline communities, people who live by the highways, their personal health is damaged from breathing in these pollutants. They will have long-term disability issues. They will have asthma. They will have health concerns, such as when we had the pandemic that just happened. People in those communities were more adversely affected. This is why this matters. And Mr. Bando, just to move on to the next topic, is we need to act now. Mm-hmm. That is the most important message we've had conferences, we've had meetings, we've had studies, we've had white papers. How do we just move forward and initiate this process?
Well, I'd like to point to one, sort of pick up a point from the last point that you made, which is right now we do have momentum in that companies, investors, policymakers, they are able to tie these damages that you just talked about, the damage to health, the damage to people's livelihoods, they're able to tie that to actually outcomes that tie into the productivity of the worker. The fact that if you have poor health outcomes, poor educational outcomes, poor access to transportation outcomes, these affect the individual, yes, but they also affect the overall productivity of a company or, the state or the nation. I think that is more than a realization right now. There are studies and data that suggests that, in fact, we can quantify this. So there is an ability to act on this. And so I think tying this to the urgency that you talk about, I believe that the urgency is being addressed at a sector-specific level. Those sectors that are more carbon intensive are the ones that are able to move forward, and I think we do see some leadership there, both on the private sector side of things. At the state level, there are supporting policies, whether it is through tax breaks or through technology innovations and promotion thereof, or putting in educational and training programs that support this transition. And I think at the federal level, the one that is most encouraging is the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, that has just been passed. It's the largest such program at the federal level addressing climate change, and has many elements there that are very much along the lines that you talked about, which is to say, we recognize the urgency, we have identified the potential players at the sector level, and perhaps a feature that is very, very important is that 40% of all of the IRA-related investments should go into those very same communities we were talking about, the marginalized communities, people that are the BIPOC communities, etc. So I think this tie-in is very important. We're talking about action at the private sector level. We're talking about state level actions. We're talking about federal level actions. Now, this is a sort of supportive network that's in place. And I believe it does address, at the moment, the fact that we're all aware of the urgency. And one more thing there, the tie-in to supply chains that often tend to be global. So the fact that we have green procurement that is being promoted at the federal level is then going to lead to technologies and scaling up of processes that will allow for costs to come down. And then that will allow us to see that there's a pressure on the supply chain to do the things that would then lead to swifter decarbonization. I think that recognition of that holistic nature of this effort is something that's there. It's happening, and I think I'm very optimistic that's a real strong movement along those lines.
Oh, absolutely. What I always tell people when you get pushback or saying there's not enough resources, we're doing the right thing. It's that simple. We need to focus on doing the right thing and getting that forward. And there are a lot of new inventors out there and startups that are just doing that. Joel, I did see that you were hesitant. You were going to ask a question, I think. So I apologize.
No. So I guess one question that I do have regarding the Inflation Reduction Act is when it comes to doing some of the work, whether it's transportation or any of these things that are going to be happening in marginalized communities, is it being set up to actually include people? Are there provisions within this, if anybody knows, to actually say the people who live there need to be part of this project, whether it's actually working to create jobs? So that way it does also bring us back to the trust issue of saying, you're including us, we see ourselves working to better things. There's got to be some sort of a psychological aspect there to just say, like, I recognize the people that are doing the work and I see myself in them.
Absolutely. Having a seat at the table as an equal, that's exactly kind of the real issue there, because often in the past, people have had a seat at the table, but it's only after the plans have been half-baked. Mm-hmm. And that's not the way to go. It's back to your trust issue. Right. So I think there's a big push towards that's happening. But I also must suggest that there are some constraints. The very same people that we are expecting to come to the table with ideas and be part of the discussion as equal, they also might not have the resources. They might not have the time, they might not have the skill set or the expertise. So to the extent that that's a a gap or a barrier, if you may. I think that needs to be recognized. Interestingly, there are programs and provisions within elements of the IRA in particular, but several programs at different states. So state level activities that try to address that. Again, it's not all going to get done at once, but there are ways in which we're saying, look, if you need to access these resources, here's what you need to do to equip yourself so that when you do come to the table, you are able to talk in a manner that is, consistent with what everyone else is coming there.
And that also brings in like the equity and inclusivity of everything. I would like to start talking specifically about what Ceres does, because you guys are a fantastic organization. I mean, I've known about you guys for years, but I'm not sure everyone out there knows about you guys. So could you talk about what you are doing and how you're born in action and working with large corporations to move this forward?
Yeah, just to give you Ceres was born out of the Exxon Valdez spill and the settlement that came out of that. So we're talking about back in 1989. Part of the resources were put into creating Ceres initially to focus on looking at the impacts of climate change and looking at mitigation options, adaptation options. Subsequently, we have moved into recognizing that climate change is not just one pillar. It's tied to access to water, to energy security, to biodiversity. So we do address those issues, and we're essentially a think tank that works, as we like to say, at the grass tops level. We have an investor network, and these investors are the big, large institutional investors, currently with about $64 trillion of assets under management. To give you an idea, that's about half of the global total of assets under management. Plus, we work with the large companies, so decision makers at the Fortune 500 companies. And our theory of change suggests that by talking to these people and by making them talk to each other, we are able to then have them do certain things that will have large impacts because of their large. So one small decision change in the right direction coming from this level is going to have ripple effects throughout the economy and globally. So that being said, we see ourselves as, within Ceres, as pulling together these coalitions, creating these alliances. We have several networks that focus on specific sectors. One, for example, that we talk about a lot is Ambition 2030, which is 5 key carbon-intensive sectors, like steel, like oil and gas. We also include banking in there. The idea there is that these food and beverages is another one. So these are the kinds of sectors where if they take action now, talking back to your urgency question, if they take urgent action now, we can then move the needle when it comes to decarbonizing the economy. So that requires a lot of discussion, a lot of convening of ideas, hammering out action plans that can be implemented, ensuring that all of these just and inclusive economics issues get addressed, and working with the supply chain so that not only are we working with entities within the United States, but entities globally, so that the supply chain impacts can then lead to the ripple effects that we are talking about. So that's kind of what Ceres does, is push action.
I was just going to say, some of the best minds in the world work for you guys, and just guiding these companies on how to do it correctly, to do the right thing, is phenomenal. I mean, again, I've been following you guys for years. Joel, did you have anything specific? Because I know Ceres is probably a bit new to you.
Well, I guess, you're talking about the sectors that you work with. And one question, which I don't know if you can actually answer this or not, but which sectors do you see moving the fastest, and which ones do you sit there and be like, come on, guys, get your crap together?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I answer it this way, and honestly, so that it is really not a race between the sectors. It is based on what is possible.
Okay.
So for example, a sector that is very carbon intensive, even a 5% reduction is a huge move, right? One, because their processes, their technologies, their supply chains are carbon intensive by nature, and you're not going to make them zero carbon overnight. So if you can get them to move by 5%, 5% of a large base, that's a big move. Uh, so I think that's how I look at it, which is, where do you stand relative to where you were, and what is the potential? And this is, of course, a very difficult question, because particularly when it comes to new processes, new technologies, new assets put in place, you have to think about all of the incentives, all of the uh, things that it takes for a technology to go from pre-commercial to where it's completely scaled up. Also, how fast do you move? What do you do with the assets that you're leaving behind? The whole question of stranded assets. And, so some of these facilities, once put in, are there for the next 30 years. So how do you address that? So I bring this in to suggest to you that I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's a good idea to be comparing sector A to sector B to sector C and then create a race, because that's not the right frame to put this discussion into.
Okay, fine. Whatever.
Yeah,
No, it's true,
but I
though.
think it's still very interesting to say that, in fact, there are some sectors where you will, or some companies and some communities where you have very proactive leadership, that within a given sector you can show the leaders and those that are not leaders. And in fact, we do that all the time. We try to show best practices. We try to shine the spotlight on the companies that are doing the best, as it were. And we have very clear metrics, transparency in terms of measuring, benchmarking, and reporting. And then we use our forums to show the others what is being done, what can be done, and provide that nudge. And that's our approach, really. So within each sector, there are definitely ways of
Oh, yeah. I mean, positive reinforcement time and time again will win over negative reinforcement. People want to be encouraged. They don't want to be yelled at. They don't want to be shamed or blamed. And we know this. So as we close out, since we're reaching our half-hour mark, how would you like people to find you and maybe donate to your organization, since you are a 501c3? And how can people help and get involved?
I think on the last one, the getting involved is where we really would like people to feel free to contact us. To find us, you should visit our website, and that's www.ceres.org. Certainly contact me. I'm really open to any kinds of communications. And again, contact me by email, through the website. Would love to hear from people, particularly from communities that are thinking about these issues, because I'm particularly interested in the JIE side of things, and would love to hear from you. What are you doing? What are you thinking? What are the challenges? Who are the people that you're talking to? I would love to create a conversation around that. We have many opportunities, events, webinars, what we call learning power hours, introducing each other to different concepts, different ideas, different, stakeholders and champions. So I'd love to hear from that. And any way in which we can get involved, that'll be fantastic. I really appreciate that.
I love that. I mean, it's all about communication, education, outreach, letting people know. And the fact you guys are a think tank, you are sharing a vast amount of knowledge with people who may be hesitant to learn. They may say, oh, this is above what I can understand. This is, I don't know what this is. You help them make it simple. And it is.
I hope we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
You summarize that really well. That really is the bottom line. It's all about communication, because a lot gets done that doesn't get noticed.
Yes.
And a lot of things get noticed that if we have a better discussion, we can explain why this is happening the way it is. And I think that is the key part of the back and forth that we try to encourage and foster.
That is beautifully said. So we will close out on that, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Wendy Nystrom with Environmental Social Justice with my co-host Joel Vendette. And thank you, Mr. Amit Bando from Ceres. This is a wonderful conversation, and a little shout out to Barbara for helping us with our communication issues earlier. So thank you all. We will catch you next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.